You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards-Nagel, and Teighlor Polindo. Well, I have a little something for you ladies.
Is it a poem?
Nope.
Is it a quiz?
How about your department?
You're like or spoken word. You're like
no, nothing. None of those fun things. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on our podcast today. We have a wonderful crew attending to your every need. Meredith, we have her in the main cabin, and we do have the TalkDoc in first class. My name's Teighlor. We're here to make sure your relationship is safe and happy. Please sit back, relax as we review the safety features of those relationships. Have you ever been curious what it's like to be on a flight with me? Because that's pretty much it.
That was
incredible.
Great. Loved that.
Oh, God.
Wow.
I do love flying.
Or hearing from our flight
Round of
attendant.
applause.
I love it.
No, okay, we do. We have an important episode today. And as we say every time, this podcast is to improve our communication and relationships. So today's topic, it seems like maybe sometimes we need to reevaluate our relationships and see if maybe there are any red flags. So today's topic, we're going to look at red flags.
And I think we would also want to say that this is not just for all of you listening. It's also for the people that you care about. And a lot of times I find myself, especially with my girlfriends, asked my opinion about who they're dating or what do you think? And I think it's good for us to review this topic and sort of talk about the serious side of some of these things that could be dangerous or demeaning or toxic.
Yeah. And I did want to say, if you have experienced the things that we're going to talk about today, like no shame. I don't want a sense of failure to be put on you, because I can speak for myself. I have experienced some of these things, and I don't think it's a failure to like be in a relationship. Hopefully you've learned something and can get out of it, because they're not good things. But I just don't want like a sense of shame or like shame on you for being in another relationship with another red flag. This whole process is a growth process, and we're all
That's
trying
right.
to do a little bit
And one of the
better.
things that we would say too is not all of these can be detected before they appear. So it's not about, not paying attention or something like that. I mean, it could be in some ways, but it doesn't have to be. And we can't predict what other people are going to do. And because we can't predict what they're going to do, we can't know with certainty what's next.
Yeah. It's hard to hear that when you're in it. I feel like if I could go back in some relationships I've been in, if I were to hear this, I would have those feelings of like being ashamed or like, oh, how could I not see this? Or so dumb to do this again or whatever. And that's not what this is about, but it's also just looking out for people you love too.
Yeah.
And having the language, maybe you need to be able to call out what you see. If you have a friend asking you what you think about this person you're dating.
Yeah.
So what are the red flags? What are they? Dating red flag is something that's like a warning sign, something that appears that could create a problem. Maybe it's miscommunication, or it's some challenges that you could foresee piling up in the future. Some examples of these are people that just only talk about themselves, avoiding difficult conversations, constantly referencing past relationships, and maybe even withholding affection. These dating red flags can show themselves through a negative sign, so specifically negative things or actions. It can also be verbal or physical cues, potentially the hint of a personality flaw, and the key is that they can be dangerous if they're not spotted early. We chose to highlight some of the most intense or dangerous or worrisome ones that we wanted to discuss in this episode.
So, Mare, when you say red flags, are you saying that we're just going to talk about that? Because aren't some of them not like as bad?
Yeah, so what's going to be great about this next few episodes on these topics is today is really about the ones that are the most dangerous. Flags that we believe and that we've read by experts should never be ignored, and in yourself, and to call out in those that you love. We're going to do this in 3 different parts. The second is going to be what some may want to call yellow. I still want to call red, but that's just because I don't want, if you're like I was before, you are thinking to yourself, well, it's yellow, so it's not that bad. It's still red. Okay, people? Just listen. You'll see. And then the third one is we thought, you know what? Let's talk about some green flags. What are good things? What's the opposite of this? A lot of times we get into this, like the bad things to look out for. How about some good things to look out for? So just wait for us on that. It'll come.
All right. So first of three, we're doing red.
Yes. All right. So you want to just jump in, Tay? I'll start first, I think.
Yeah.
With the first one.
Yeah, let's get into it. What are these big things?
Number one, and bit of like a trigger warning on these, and we want to pass out some resources later on too on this stuff. But the first one would be abuse of any kind. So that's emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, financial, even gaslighting. So, well, what is abuse? Abuse is to use something improperly or wrongly, to misuse it. See, abusing authority, for example. It's to treat something with harm or offense, speaking insultingly, harshly, or unjustly. And emotional abuse falls under this umbrella as well. First, with emotional abuse, there typically is a pattern of behavior that happens, whether it's a pattern of insults, someone constantly humiliating you. Generally, you find yourself feeling that you're afraid, and usually a person is using fear in order to control you. Something also to note is that potentially you see someone that you love, maybe they're kind of like the world they're living in, their bubble or their reality, you could call it. It may seem a bit distorted, and then they start to internalize those things as that abuse as their own failing or like not good enough, things like that. Another way I thought of this in a relationship I had that matched this was that you start to feel like you're crazy. You're like, I remember like driving and being like, yeah, like I'm kind of weird. Like I'm weird. And you start like thinking it's you, like you're feeling like you're a crazy person.
Which is related to gaslighting, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I do remember one example of this where sometimes someone can flip the script of this, where I asked someone I was dating, or it was actually, no, it was my ex-husband. I don't mind saying that. I asked like, oh, I would like to spend time together. We don't, maybe like once a week. And I was told I was being controlling and for wanting to schedule that. And that I was, I don't know, like I was being ridiculous and why do I need to do that? And then I remember thinking like, oh yeah, maybe that's right. Like I don't need to tell someone to spend time with me once a week. Now I'm like,
yeah,
Jesus. All I wanted was like have a beer once a week or something, or a coffee or whatever. Anyway, so we all know that this is a red flag here, right? But a lot of times people make excuses for this type of abuse. This research from Psychology Today talked about that if you've been abused in a previous relationship, or maybe had some sort of abuse, whether you witnessed in your own parents or in your childhood in some way, you might have a hard time labeling this one because you're used to it, you've grown accustomed to it, and you've kind of learned to blame yourself for it. So this can also unfold itself in a way where you're swayed if someone becomes very overly apologetic, which is typical in emotional abuse. There's like the high negativity and then the like big time apology, right? So then you fall back into that pattern. The key here is to not discount these moments of derogatory name calling, to not discount the moments of someone trying to pressure you physically if you don't want something, or for example, someone even going so far as to tell you what to wear. I think that's happened with some people we know as well. And the key too is that these tend to increase, so they don't get better over time. And that's another thing I would think before is like, oh, we'll work on this, it will get better. Someone being abusive isn't your job to fix.
And all of this sounds like it gets into this category that's broader, that's more about controlling behavior. So this idea that people start controlling you and it's not checked and it's not stopped and it's not talked about. And so then you get into things like maybe somebody trying to read your messages or demanding they have your passcode on your phone. Or
social media is a big one with that. I know someone in my life that was like, oh, let me see who's messaging you or who follows you. Or I looked this up and saw that you still follow this person. Like that's out there. And that is, it's abusive. No other word for it.
Maybe that could translate into a bigger behavior of control. So someone might decide who you can spend time with, who you're allowed to talk to, where you're allowed to go, how you spend your money. I mean, it could be all kinds of things, right? Controlling behavior, well, we could debate how yellow or red it gets, and we're going to do that on the next episode for sure. When it's left unchecked, it's going red. meaning it's going to escalate into this high level of controlling behavior. And if it's not checked and it continues to grow, you get yourself into a situation that can be dangerous. So we want to stop here and say in the show notes, we have information about the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And if you are interested in seeing that link and you want to get more information, we'll drop it there so you can get some help that you deserve if this is resonating with you.
Okay, so one of the ones that we came across is called love bombing. And at first I thought it was, oh, that sounds nice. And we'll get into that a little bit later from like our cultural stance. But
Yes.
it's sort of involving grand gestures, these big sweeping statements. If the relationship becomes all consuming, sometimes they say things like, oh, you're my soulmate, or I love you. And this is in the first few days or weeks of dating. It feels nice, I think, to think you're like that spectacular, that someone could fall that deeply in love with you that quickly. But it also comes with a pressure to become too serious too fast, and that could involve having sex too soon for you, whatever that may be, moving in together or getting married. Also, over-the-top compliments or grand gestures. Sometimes that can be a way of manipulating when they want to take care of your mortgage maybe, or buy you a car. But then those can kind of come with some expectations maybe later, or control. Yep. And then this is the one that I have felt, was calling or texting, emailing, over the top communication. And again, we think of this sort of as this grand gesture, but I think the distinction is if it's overwhelming to you, if you're having these feelings, then that's the red flag. Dr. Kelman says that the person comes on so strong in the beginning, but then also leaves quickly, and you're left scratching your head, kind of heartbroken, like, what the hell just happened? So that was my example. Was this guy I went on one date with, and he would send like 15 long text messages like in a row. And I was at that stage in my life, would never leave someone on red. I could not respond to someone. And I would say, like, this is a little overwhelming. Like, we've had one date. And then I'd get another 20 text messages. I was like, I need you to not be sending all of these things. And then he had another group. And then he was talking about this. Oh, I talked to my girlfriend, and she was like, yeah, this is a little bit much. And then another 20 text messages. So I finally just had to stop communicating. It was very uncomfortable.
Okay. So flag number 3 is love bombing.
Love bombing. Yeah.
So we have, thanks to Teighlor, the movie lover, which I so appreciate that you did this. If you don't know a little bit of Teighlor, you should know she just speaks movie quotes. That's her love language. That's a positive. That's the green flag for Teighlor. We'll get into that later. Okay, so Teighlor quotes Perks of Being a Wallflower, the movie. It says, we accept the love we think we deserve. So this red flag is actually, you feel insecure on the relationship, so you don't act like yourself. You're constantly trying to change. So you're never good enough, and you find that they're always trying to change you as well.
So this is the inadequacy flag.
Yes. That's a one-word way of putting it. Yeah. Everything about you is inadequate, always trying to do better, be better. And it's not in a way that's positive, obviously. So an example of someone I love shared with me once, this person was like, you don't do anything. What are you even doing? Like, you need to like get a better job, or you need to do this. And it was always something to be better. But it wasn't in a way to go like, oh, you work really hard. There's no uplifting motive. It's not motivation. It's just being inadequate. And you can never win. The thing that's really interesting about this is that in what we learned is that your mind, your body, and your spirit, they're all interconnected, which is really interesting to note. That's why that researchers find symptoms of stress, depression, anxiety show up in our bodies in this way, as well as in our thoughts and feelings. You find yourself constantly wondering if you level up or you measure up to somebody, and you're not enough all the time in every way. Be very careful of this flag. Be sure to notice even in yourself, or do you have increased health problems, increased feelings of resentment? Are you much more fearful than you were prior to this person in your life? Anger, even. Consider the relationship with that and your relationship and this person. And even I wanted to add to something, not personally my experience, but a friend of mine that I know went through something like this, is notice how this affects the good relationships in your life, how you start doubting yourself in those relationships. And even just seeking that validation again with friends that just have loved you, or family members or people in your life, and then now you're evolving, but not in a way that's promoting a better you, but because it's back to that word, just you're not enough, you're inadequate. That one's really hard to watch. Really hard to watch someone you love do that dance. This one more sticks out to me as seeing someone in my life I watched go from like all of this, like, was in the middle of learning a lot of things in the stage of their life, and then found this person that was like constantly trying to change everything about them. And so it was like they were lost, and it's like you watch this person you love like become lost. And that's a tough one. That's a really tough one to see. Yeah.
So flag number 5 is extreme jealousy. We talked a minute ago about the idea that some of these are borderline yellow, and then they trend with their great frequency or magnitude towards red. And so here we're talking about extreme cases. And we know that we all get jealous from time to time on micro, tiny little things. But this is where we start really having jealousy maybe over social networks that maybe your partner has, or outside friendships, family. But all of this is when extreme jealousy appears, it really challenges the ability to build trust in the relationship. And if you can't build trust, you have a major missing plank on the floor of your relationship. You get stuck in terms of having that deficiency paired with the extreme jealousy. So Kelman says, don't ignore this red flag because it can also lead to an abusive and controlling situation. It sort of seems like a sinkhole to me that jealousy might lead us into that worser place, where we might end up in abusive or controlling situation. Kelman further says, it's not cute for your partner to care so much about you that they are jealous of family or friends.
And that pairs well with our next one, which is when significant family and friends don't like your partner, or I would say further, not that they just don't like them, but that they're spotting red flags. So it's not just, I don't like their personality. But when they have concerns, oftentimes we see the person withdraw from their community, and that becomes isolating. So then again, with this relationship, it kind of all goes together of control and abuse and isolation. You start to take them away from everyone. And maybe you do that to yourself because you don't really want to hear from your friends and family how much they don't approve of your relationship.
In there. Yeah.
Or maybe your partner is doing that and saying like, oh, they won't give me a chance. They don't like me, whatever it is. And they start to pull you away, and they can then get jealous of you spending time with those people. And it is definitely a red flag if they're getting angry, jealous, or critical of the time you spend with your friends and family. If your inner circle is trying to highlight red flags to you, like really, please listen to them. And maybe go check it against a neutral third party. Like, if you don't trust that inner circle's word, like, why are they your inner circle? You obviously trust them for a reason. They're your people. So I think it is really worth listening to them when they bring up concerns. And if you kind of just explain them away, or your partner explains them away, maybe go talk to someone else who doesn't know your partner and you personally.
But don't you think, like, I hear people say, well, you just don't want me to be happy. Or you just don't want me to have this special relationship. That wouldn't be why I would speak up. The fact that I'm speaking up is the fact that I care about you. I'm giving you information that's not so great to share.
Yeah. Because I actually love you so much that it's worth putting. And I will say this has not gone well for me. I've tried to sometimes share, and not even unsolicited. Like, my friends will ask what I think about their relationship, and it's not been received always, or they'll just listen and completely ignore it. So please.
It makes sense it's not received well, though. I mean, speaking as someone that's been there, 6 is a good one for me in that. Probably would have skipped over a few before. So I'm having that moment where I'm like, oh, if I would have just listened to 6, I wouldn't have to deal with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that was the point. We started saying that we don't want your head to go there. Mine's doing it anyway. But this is something I definitely felt was ignored for me. An element of that is you want so badly to pick good. You don't want people to say like, oh, you got a bad picker. Like, that's annoying.
Right. But also rely on your circle of people as a resource. And I think what I witnessed with some friends is you don't hear the truth about a relationship till the end of it. And I was like, oh my God, like, I didn't know they did that to you.
Me?
You might be one of them. I was like, I got the highlight reel. Dude, what are we doing? I can't help you if you don't tell me what's actually going on. And I think that's a red flag in yourself. Like if you don't feel comfortable sharing the bad stuff too, and I understand there's some discretion there, but if you don't feel comfortable with anyone else, that seems like a red flag, that you're a bit afraid that you know it's a red flag and you just don't want anyone to hold you accountable.
Yeah, hiding. I was going to say, I think braided in between all of these is hiding. If you're hiding from the people that know you and love you, like some of these things, it's time to open your eyes, I think. And that's
you gotta reevaluate some things.
But,
of course.
And we can talk ourselves out of most things, but I love your point, Teighlor, about saying, hey, these are your committed people. These are your circle. And because they're your people, this dismissal of all of them or most of them does seem like really dangerous. But I do agree that it's what you said, Meredith, that you have to not hide. You have to actually reveal what's going on. And I know from friends of mine who have had some of these situations, I think that's really hard, but really important to say here on this episode, which is that thing you're talking about, Meredith, hiding. And if you're finding yourself hiding more and more things, you would want to see that as an escalating pattern.
Yeah,
for sure. I think a key thing is to know that above everything else here, we want you to know us too, and you deserve safe and healthy relationships.
Yes.
And if you're experiencing any form of any of these things that we've talked about, of any type of relational abuse, so the National Domestic Hotline is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the U.S. at 1-800-799-SAFE. Or you can text START to 88788. There's also live people to chat with online at thehotline.org.
Okay. And so in the United Kingdom, we have many listeners. The number there is 0808 2000 247. And we'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So why we ignore these red flags. And I think there's a lot of answers as to why we do this. And one of the main ones, of course, I love to talk about is our media. I think we've heard it before. I certainly have. Oh, the romantic comedy, that's fake love. It's giving you like these false identities or whatever. But I never really thought about how much influence that could actually have on my day-to-day life and how often it is represented. We see it in movies, books, music, and then that affects the whole world around us. And those relationships then shape our worldview of what a relationship should be. There's this article, Toxic Love, by Jodine Samuels. They say the idealized view of love has toxic roots that have been planted in the media that we consume. And we see it in tons of stories. We start pretty young with all the Disney, all the fun love stories. But Little Mermaid, she gives up her voice. Beauty and the Beast, she falls for her kidnapper. Aladdin is constantly lying to Jasmine.
You're ruining my Disney movies.
I know. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I give to my kids?
Moana.
I know. But it reinstills this idea that toxic is romantic, chaos is good, and that nice is boring. Like, how many romantic comedies can you name where there's this wonderful guy and like, oh, well, it just doesn't make me feel like...
Is that what you're saying I've talked about before? I had a therapist tell me about that.
No,
chaos.
you just mentioned it. No, you have definitely talked about that, but about losing yourself, you kind of cease to exist because you have to strive to always be...
Oh yeah, I did that for my ex-husband before I left. I was like, I'm gonna spend like 3 months of my life thinking I'll be all the things you want me to be, and it still wasn't it. And then I was like, well, where'd I go?
Right. And if you lose yourself and then the love ends, what are you left with? I might have slept on the pavement a few nights to see those Twilight movies, but Bella literally...
I know you did.
I don't regret it. But Bella literally gives up her life to be with her guy over and over and over again in almost all our love stories. I don't know, it's just giving this really dangerous idea that basically you should stay in these abusive relationships. And it, I think, has truly affected...
So no more movies, social media, or television.
Right. Or start evaluating.
Vetting. That's right.
For me. petting. I mean, I was literally proposed to in a movie theater, so you both were there. But one thing I liked this kind of question, like, what is a healthy relationship? And I think at the bare minimum, respect, equality, compassion, trust, and consent.
In some of this, we could blame ourselves, or we could think it's because we're not smart enough, we're not paying attention enough. And we wouldn't actually, from the research, really conclude that. In fact, we know that our past and our experiences do feed into how we end up where we are. It might be that you've had certain things modeled in the media, like Teighlor said, or you've had family members model different patterns or traits, maybe even normalize things that aren't normal. And that could be friends, that could be anyone around you. But sometimes we forget that, for example, someone who's had a family trauma, they might struggle to recognize red flags at all because they didn't see them modeled out in a way that was productive. And so as you're kind of thinking through these topics, I don't know, even the friends that might ask you your opinion, to have a lot of compassion in talking with them and not say you should know or you should have figured this out, but say you, for some reason, we don't need to know what reason, but for some reason this red flag wasn't seen. And because it wasn't seen, we see it now. And we have all the compassion in seeing it now versus shaming someone for not seeing it. And whether that's from your family background, from your experience, just not knowing or being manipulated, it's just hard to know. But I don't think anything but compassion belongs there when we're helping a friend.
Yeah. It's always easier to spot it for someone else, too. Like, let's just be honest. It's different when it's for yourself, which is, again, maybe why you should listen to friends.
Yeah. So we have 4 more things to think about. One is that we get stuck on this really wishful thinking. The second is that we don't want to admit we're wrong, guilty. We want to be right. We don't want to fail. That's me. Number 3, we don't trust ourselves. And 4 is we think the red flag is minor, and there's reasons for that. So when we get stuck in wishful thinking, if you're someone like this, you may tell yourself you have this fantasy of what the relationship could be, right? If they only lived up to their potential, you know, what it could be, what it is, right? And it prevents your lens, that lens that you cover, that rose-covered lens, prevents you from seeing things as they really are. The second is we don't want to admit we're wrong. We want to be right, so we don't, quote, fail. True. I get it. I don't like to admit when I'm wrong. It's hard to admit when a relationship that you picked and you put effort into or you dove into didn't work out, or you think you maybe misjudged somebody. It's all of these things. It's hard to admit that and to know that. And Dr. K, you were saying that earlier. Sometimes because people are conniving and sneaky and whatever it is, they don't show these colors right away. And a lot of times people show their best self in the beginning.
Often.
Everybody tries to. Yeah, often. Also pride and that fear of failing, it can keep you in the relationship even when it becomes increasingly dysfunctional or when the abuse continues. 3 is we don't trust ourselves. This is where you might think perhaps you have a sense, that gut feeling, that something's wrong, but you continue anyway. You may tell yourself that, oh, I'm just overreacting, or I'm just focusing on the negative. And when you do this, what's really important to know is that you betray yourself and what you know to be true. So I will scaringly give an example here of that. I think it was like 2 weeks before I got married the first time. I remember laying on my parents' kitchen floor, and I was like thinking to myself, I think I was telling my mom, she'll probably laugh when she hears this now. We can all laugh about it now. And I was like, oh, I'm just being emotional. It's just the planning of the wedding is stressing me out. That's what it is. It's all it is. It's just stress. But I remember going to bed a couple times, a couple weeks before I got married, thinking something isn't right. And just not listening to myself. And it's such a betrayal of yourself. I don't know. That gut is real. I've heard I just think it is. Okay.
Can I tell a story here real quick?
Oh, go ahead.
So this happened a really long time ago, but I was teaching an interpersonal class. I was lecturing, and I had this woman in the class who was engaged, and she had talked about getting married and going on her honeymoon over spring break. And I never asked her about how it went. And then about a year later, I see her in Calm Theory. So I'm talking to her in Calm Theory. How's it going? And she said, well, I need to talk to you after class, and it's very important. And I said, okay.
Oh,
so she comes up after class and she goes, so do you remember when I took you interpersonal and I was getting married over spring break? And I said, yeah. And she said, you had just lectured on red flags in relationships. And I went home and broke up with him, and we lost our $13,000 deposit. And I told my parents and his parents, and we broke up that night after class. It was a night class. 6 weeks before the wedding. She said, thank you
Good
so
job.
much for preventing that giant mistake. And I said, I'm not the one that prevented it. And she said,
Oh,
no, but she said she was giving me more credit. And I said, I have to give you a lot of credit because that is a very difficult thing to do when you're, especially when you're that close.
yeah.
Years
Yeah.
of dating in, and then now you're 6 weeks ahead of the wedding. She said gifts were there. They had to all be returned to the people, and her parents were very nice about it. I have lost touch with her. So if you are hearing this and it's us, call me, email me. But that I haven't thought about that story for a long time. But I really have to say I deliver material because it's part of my job. The bravery really comes, even for any of you on this episode, saying, do I need to take some action? The really hard part is not us giving the content. The really hard part is taking the action. And we give you massive credit for doing it.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Round of applause. Wow. Man,
No.
what a brave woman.
But she did it after class. I was like, wow.
Jeez.
Dang.
Wow.
Probably
Wow.
saved her a lot in divorce, though.
Yeah.
Can we just say, maybe you don't want to throw out the wedding, but maybe it'll save you money.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, Mary, when you were saying, well, that we don't trust ourselves, it made me think of our gaslighting episodes. If you check those two out with Stacey Ross, if they're gaslighting you, they're reiterating don't trust yourself because they constantly are trying to not get you to trust yourself because they're kind of spinning all these webs of lies and manipulation around you. If you're experiencing that, maybe check out those episodes too.
So it might be worth it to review it anyway, just to
Yeah.
make sure you're clear on what it is and isn't.
Yeah.
Because a lot of
Yes.
people say, you know, if somebody says something sarcastic, they'll say, oh, you're gaslighting me. And we wouldn't say it's that minimal. We would say it's a much broader, more intense, more dangerous pattern. And we detail it in those two episodes, 23 and
Yeah.
24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a pattern for sure. Okay, and then the fourth one here we have is that the red flags seem minor. This one is meaty and it's just hard. So minimizing these flags, it's another level of this self-betrayal. When you are in love or you want to think the best of somebody, you make excuses for them. Typically, if they have some harmful behavior, you find yourself making excuses. It's important to notice these flags, even if you may think that they're small, especially if they become part of this pattern. Like we've said, things like increasing, right? Or this pattern of disrespect or hurtful behavior. We learn these certain patterns during our developmental stages of life, super important periods of life. So even if you're like a parent of a little person, it makes me think about this, preparing for this. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I modeling these things? Like not modeling these things, right, for my child. So if these patterns are unhealthy or dysfunctional at these stages of your life, it doesn't mean you can't have a good relationship. It doesn't mean that. Stop it. Stop thinking that way. But we have to be more self-aware of your behavior, of our behaviors or someone else's, whether that's through therapy or really deep self-reflection. We have to continue to notice these patterns well into adulthood. We ignore destructive behaviors because they don't register in our minds as unhealthy, but rather as tolerable or even normal.
Yikes.
I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. I remember thinking, oh yeah, guys get mad like that. That's normal. And I'm just like supposed to help them. And that's not a big deal. It's like, hurt? You know? So this minimizing, it becomes really easy when you have a family of origin with certain types of dysfunctional patterns. These things become almost familiar to you. And you may even ask yourself, which is why I said, stop that right now. Will you ever be able to have a healthy relationship? Yes, you will. But it does depend on your level of insight on yourself. So getting to know yourself and the amount of work that you're willing to put into yourself. So it seems super unfair if you don't ask for this trauma history, you don't ask for the family you're born into. You may have to work harder than some people to overcome this. Gillis, who says that your peers take for granted that they were conditioned to expect healthy relationships. You might find yourself surrounded with somebody that you're like, oh, well, you had this, so my lot in life is to be with people like this. No, you might have to do some more work. Think of the reward you might get at the end of that. You know, don't settle. All right, so what do we do then?
I mean, I think what we do is maybe 3 pathways. One is get help if you need it. So that's if you're a victim of some of these red flags and you're in a place where you're feeling trapped or smaller or less heard or more restricted, maybe is a good way to say it. So get some help. And we think outside help is a great idea in some situations, and that needs to be evaluated. Second thing I think would be to give help if you're in that friend circle or you're outside viewing these things going on, try to give some resources, some education, some support, whatever that is. We've been talking about having an absence of judgment. I don't think judgment's useful here. Like, I was right about him. I was right about her. Like, that's the worst.
Yeah.
So I think if
Not
you're
helpful.
giving out help, you'd have to give it out in a non-judgmental way. And then I think maybe if you were from a background where you didn't have models of healthy relationships, just like we say to study your partner, study your relationship and start looking for ways you can improve both parties and start thinking about this is a valued, worthwhile thing to engage in. So how do I get to authentic and real communication? How do I get to talking about hard topics directly? I haven't enjoyed doing that, but I do it because it needs to be done. And when we figure out the work to be done, and we take on that work, we can get to a better place. So I think get help, I think give help, and I think get resources and make it your project, make it your priority, dedicate yourself to it.
Yeah. Don't worry about being a failure. That would be my last, just like to reiterate that or stress that.
And I don't think ending a relationship is failure. Like, you learned something, you grew.
When you're in that, it's hard to feel that though. Like,
sure.
How do you leave an engagement and not feel like a
painful.
failure? How do you leave a marriage and not feel like a failure? How do you leave something you've done for so many years and not feel like it's...
But let's separate thinking and feeling. A good decision might have residual feelings with it initially that don't match up.
Mic drop. Thank
So
you.
I get that you won't feel great about it, great about breaking up the wedding before 6 weeks before the wedding starts. But later, and having seen her a year later and having her talk about that, she was like, that's a great decision that I made. And here's where I am now. And I'm doing all these things. And I went and she had done a bunch of things in her life and kind of really changed her life trajectory and felt that it was a great decision. But I don't know that we feel great about it initially because it's not great. And I think the feelings match the negativity of the situation, the effects of the red flag, more than they match the decision that we're making to get rid of them.
A lot of what we talk about on this podcast is getting to know yourself, because you don't really know if you're doing these things or if maybe you're seeing improvement in the tools you're using unless you know yourself. And I would kind of guess that when you look at your life, what do you want to happen? What are your goals? What do you picture for yourself in the future? Because I don't think that like this wonderful life just happens all of a sudden. I think it takes a lot of choices and steps to get there. So reevaluating your own life and what you want for yourself, and then making the choices on how to get there. It's very different than just like, well, one day I'll have a wonderful, beautiful relationship. Like, it actually is going to take some work, starting with evaluating yourself and what you have, and then how can you get to what you want.
I love it. Okay. So in our next episode, we're going to talk about yellow flags. Now, we realize that some of them might be red to you or might be yellow to you. You think they're red?
I think they're red.
So we're going to ask you to join in on the debate, and we'll see you on that next episode. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.